Okay, this is a video response to InMendham. I want to say thank you very much for your response to my video, and I want to say I'm very sorry for how long it took me to get back and respond to you on it. My productivity on this channel is not what I would like it to be, and I also want to apologize because I'm not such a great talker, and it probably did take me a little too long to get some of my my questions out, and I probably wasn't very clear on a few things, and that might have led to a little confusion on a point or two. One thing I want to talk about just briefly before I get into too much detail here is that you kind of made the point at the end of the video that, well, good Lord, you just got through showing all this horror on your video, and then, you're going to try to make some point that sort of deletes all of that. It seems ridiculous. Well, yeah, that was intentional, of course. I wanted to basically have a lot of horrific images, and that's why I chose those antinatalism videos, because I thought they did a good job of that. And it's almost like a tip of the hat to that idea. I want to drive the point home that, yeah, I get it. These are the whole system seems really horribly, unnecessarily violent and absurd. Of course, I get all that. I get that whole point, and I just wanted to make that clear. And I thought that, presenting those videos would sort of drive that point home. So I just want to get that out there, that, yeah, I do understand that is the basis of, or that is a central focus of everything. Okay, so now on to some of the points brought forth in your response. I'm going to start with kind of the weaker stuff and then get to the heart of the matter. The delusions thing, I kind of just put that out there, and yeah, you made an excellent point. And on when I made the point about, yeah, well, from a certain perspective, that was very weak, and I admit that, and I acknowledge that. And yes, I kind of knew that when I was printing the video that was kind of a weak point to make in regards to the overall point I was trying to get at. And so, yeah, that was a bad thing to say, and you brought that home perfectly. But the real point that was being made there was that delusions aren't necessarily a bad thing, or if they are, I don't really see it. And you brought forth what I thought happened was, in your response, was that you were saying that when it seemed like you smuggled in a different set of values in order to evaluate a delusion. Yes, if a delusion, you can evaluate delusions and say that this delusion is harmful and this delusion isn't harmful. That was kind of the point that I was making, that delusions aren't necessarily bad. It depends on what sort of value you ascribe to it, or how you apply the values to it. So I think maybe I didn't really understand what you were saying, because you said that, well, what if your delusion is, you're ripping apart the flesh of an animal and you kind of enjoy that and that whole thing. And maybe I just didn't really get what you're saying. It could be that you meant that delusions are necessarily bad because, and they're universally bad because they necessarily require something else to suffer. And maybe you were that was the point you were making. I'm not totally sure about that, but maybe you could flesh that out a little more. So on the question about quantifications and the assessment process that I sort of presented, yes, I'm sorry again that I took so long to sort of spit that whole thing out. I was trying to be clear in what I was saying, and that's why it took so long, I guess. But I think your basic response to that was, well, it's just a pointless question. There's just no way this is going to happen. Yeah, that's almost certainly true. But the thing is that the point in doing that whole process was to just kind of get an idea of how you are actually evaluating things. Basically, what type of, I guess, in terms of ratios, what kind of ratio is acceptable and what isn't? Is there a threshold that does exist? I mean, obviously, you're saying that the situation we have is extreme, but what if it weren't extreme? I'm just trying to understand the quantification process, and if you think it's pointless to even talk about it, that's fine. I just wanted to, and I get that, but I just wanted to get a little more clarification as to how things are processed from a quantification standpoint. If you had a ratio that said that, if you had, say, suffering over happiness, and you quantified that specifically, what would be acceptable and what wouldn't be acceptable? At what point would it not be acceptable? But again, I get your point. It is probably pointless to talk about, but from a realistic perspective, but it does give, rise to some ideas towards that end, I think. So now on to sort of the main issue, and I think that's our understanding of sentience or consciousness. So I'm just going to play a few things here, and and then I'll sort of expound on things. Okay, it seemed to me that there was some confusion as to the metaphor of the light being on or the light being off. So I'm just going to play what you had to say about that from the Sam Harris video.
Nullify every possibility of experience. So if you think that a universe where the lights are on is better than a universe where the lights are off.
All right, so I love that part. That was just perfect, right? So he's comparing what's going on planet Earth in terms of, birds dumping their babies out of the nest because, they always lay more eggs than they need. So they wait until they see how they start out and see how much food's available, and then they just pick them off, just kick them the fuck out. We can just go through all the horror that's out there. And he's comparing that to a light switch where the lights go on. Like something that has pretty much, I can't even think of a negative side. I can't think of a downside to light on. There's not really any kind of downside to light on. And so he's using that as a metaphor. So why don't you use blender as the metaphor? Blender on, blender off. Right? And we know what's in the blender, right? Meat grinder on, meat grinder off. So use a real metaphor, not a metaphor completely slanted to some kind of, life is all good and no bad. Because I can't really imagine what the bad is of the lights being on.
Okay, so there you're saying that the light on, light off metaphor is referring to life itself and that whole system, but it's not referring to that at all. It's actually referring to sentience, consciousness. That's what it's referring to. And if you think about it, if we had, and I just want to say that I'm kind of more focusing on the more extreme aspects of this argument, where we're saying if you had a red button, you could end it right now, and destroy everything. If you made that red button, and I know this is unrealistic again, but if you made that red button a button that would end all consciousness, and everything's still going on, everything's still the same, it's just you have automatons walking around instead of creatures that have consciousness. Wouldn't that also solve suffering? I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Isn't that the key? And just on this whole thing, it seemed like later on you kind of understood that was what the metaphor was about.
Yeah, I can't make any sense out of that, okay? The base value has been described. It doesn't have anything to do with some sort of light-on thing. The base value isn't consciousness. The base value is the fact that consciousness can be in states, okay, negative and positive.
Right, so it seems that there you understand that the metaphor is about consciousness. It's about sentience consciousness, and that is either on or off, right? I mean, you either have a being that's conscious or not. So, yes, I don't think you're addressing it entirely, because, yes, I understand that you're saying that the base value is not consciousness. You're saying that the base value is based on consciousness. It's derived from consciousness, and that's kind of the point I'm making. How can you just ignore the value of sentience? And if you're not ignoring it, then where does it fit into the equation? That's really the question. And also, how do you determine that? And I'm assuming that you have determined that the value of sentience is much, much less than the value of suffering, which it's derived from. So, yeah, I think that hasn't really been answered to my satisfaction. But that maybe I'm just not fully understanding what you're saying. But I'm a little confused at this point, because it seems like you kind of thought the metaphor was referring to the system of life, which doesn't need consciousness. You don't have to have you don't have to have conscious creatures in order to have life itself going on and have this game that you're talking about. And it seems like all these metaphors that are, or all these descriptions and metaphors that are brought up, most of them seem to ignore consciousness altogether, even though that's where you're deriving this conclusion from.
I don't intrinsically value sentience. I value the capacity of a sentient organism to be in a state, and that there's a good state and a bad state. The question of whether sentience should exist, I believe, is different than the question of whether a sentient should be comforted if it's in distress. So those two questions are different. They're different questions. Survival and...
So I'm not convinced that it is a different question entirely when the solution to the problem is to end sentience. It seems to me that if that's your solution, then it ultimately is the question. Is sentience worth it? Is sentience itself the value that needs to be preserved? And I think that what you're saying, and I think you go on to elaborate on that in this sense, that what you're saying works better from just the perspective of the weaker portion of the argument, which is that we should stop procreation, and procreation doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think it works. I think that line of reasoning works better, and you can say, that they are two different questions from that perspective. I'm not really sure about that, but I definitely think that they're not two different questions if you're talking about something like the red button argument, which I think you have stated before that this is the logical conclusion that must be reached given all these presupposition, or not presuppositions, but all these premises that we have. So that's what I'm saying, and I think maybe we could hash this out a little more and get a little more clarity on what's going on. I think maybe things were just a little bit muddled, and I would really like to know how this whole value equation really works. A little more detail, and I really think it's an interesting topic. I think it's an interesting discussion, and I would like to learn more about it. So I really appreciate your time in responding to the original video, and hopefully we can talk some more. And I just thank you very much, and I thank everyone for listening very much. Thank you.